Hello and welcome. I'm Alican Ayanlar, and this is Strait Talk. A case, a plot. It's been described as both. We look at the fallout after a Turkish bank executive is found guilty of helping Iran evade U.S. sanctions. And a Red Sea deal causing ripples. Why Sudan's handing over of an island to Turkey has gotten its Arab neighbors worried. It's a trial that's further soured relations between the United States and Turkey. A Turkish banker from Halkbank has been found guilty of helping Iran evade U.S. sanctions. On the fourth day of deliberations, a jury in a U.S. federal court found Mehmet Hakan Atilla guilty on 5 of the 6 counts he faced, including bank fraud and conspiracy. The 12-person jury acquitted the former Halkbank executive on the charge of money laundering. He was accused of helping Iran trade its oil and gas for gold by secretly moving money through U.S. financial institutions. The U.S. government's case relied heavily on the testimony of Turkish-Iranian businessman Reza Zarrab, who was arrested on similar charges in 2016. Zarrab pleaded guilty to the charges prior to the start of the trial and then became the prosecution's star witness against Atilla. In a statement released after the verdict, the acting U.S. attorney said, "Foreign banks and bankers have a choice. You can choose willfully to help Iran and other sanctioned nations evade U.S. law, or you can choose to be part of the international banking community transacting in U.S. dollars. But you cannot do both." Turkey fired back. It says the U.S. trial was based on fake evidence and was open to political exploitation, adding that individuals linked to Fethullah Gülen associated with the case undermined the credibility of the trial.
Değerli arkadaşlar, Amerika şu anda çok ciddi bir kumpaslar zinciri içerisinde bir süreç işletiyor. Bu sadece hukukta kumpaslar değil, ekonomik alanda da kumpaslar var.
In a statement, Halkbank says its foreign trade transactions and money transfers are always carried out in an open and transparent manner. Judge Richard Berman will sentence Atilla on April the 11th. Well, joining me now to discuss the fallout is Hakkı Öcal. He's a journalist at the Daily Sabah and political analyst Salvatore. Welcome to the both of you. Hakkı Öcal, let me start with you. Since the year 2009, we've seen dozens of banks from many different countries being found guilty of violating U.S. sanctions. Yes. Some of them are heavily fined. So why is Turkey so opposed to this case?
First of all, Turkey, as government claims, has not been violating any U.S. sanctions. So they say Turkey was doing everything within the limits of these U.S. sanctions. We were totally observing the UN sanctions, and we were trying not to violate the U.S. part of it. At one point, you could transfer gold as part of any transaction you might have with Iran, and so did Turkey. And I think it was 2010, the U.S. government saw that there was this gap in their sanctions, and they changed the rules. But this time they forgot the precious stones. And Iran and some Turkish merchants found a way to use this opening. Turkey as a government Turkey says they never ever knowingly and intentionally violated the sanctions. That is why it is too hard to accept these one-sided sanctions, U.S. sanctions on the one hand. Second, being punished for something you didn't do. And also, Alican Bey, this is not happening in vacuum. There are 1 million other things that U.S. government has been doing in the bilateral relations, and this is coming on top of it.
We're going to get to that in just a second, but Salvatore, let me turn to you for a second. So Turkey's position is we're played by the rules. We've done nothing wrong. So is it the U.S. singling Turkey out?
It seems so. unfortunately. There are other cases which happened to Deutsche Bank, Crédit Agricole, and many other European banks who supposedly violated U.S. sanctions, and they have been, charged very, very high fines. But in this specific case for Halkbank, actually, it could be managed out to a certain way and not turn out to be a big event. But I think it's nothing to do with one individual case only. As Mr. Öcal said, it's 1 million other things that's actually flourished this issue.
Both of you agree that this is a multifaceted case. Is this court case just judicial, or has it turned completely political?
First of all, there's this strong belief in Turkey that the whole case has not been started by some policemen and some public prosecutors who later turned to be the parts of what they call Fethullah Gülen terror organization. Some people strongly, some officials actually, strongly believe that everything was initiated by the American authorities, and these prosecutors and policemen simply pushed their papers through the Turkish system so that those papers could be legally admissible in a U.S. court. Otherwise, how could a special prosecutor or any American federal or non-federal prosecutor could use them? Because those wiretaps were not obtained legally. All those papers, confiscated papers, were not confiscated or collected by the legal authorities.
Salvatore, I just want to turn to you for a second.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the United States is putting more of an effort into reaching out to foreign nationals and convicting them or accusing them of violating U.S. law?
This is called long arm of U.S. and it is actually not for Turkey. It's also for other countries in Europe and elsewhere. Just a couple of days after the last sessions of the trial began, a member of the board of committee of China Energy has been detained and is still in prison. He's a 68 years old, Chinese national. He's been accused that he's been bribed one of the two African countries in order to get their oil concessions. This is the thing that we have to be focused on over the next couple of years. The U.S. Continuous effort to internationalize its own law, which is maximizing its own national interest.
How is this likely to affect the Turkish economy then?
Well, it is going to be affecting Turkish economy for sure, and we have to be ready for that. Because to some extent, this trial was actually meant to be to jeopardize the very possibility of borrowing capacity of Turkey, because according to the legal concept, nobody can give punishment or penalty in any jurisdiction in the U.S. to Halkbank, because Halkbank is not a registered commercial entity in the U.S. But they are by delivering all this legally attained wiretaps and so on and so forth, they have been couple of times mentioned about the Turkish banks. Try to give the idea that they are somehow interrelated with money laundering and so on. It actually jeopardized the very reputation of the Turkish banking.
Putting aside the legality of it, if Halkbank is heavily fined, do you feel that this case could be sort of a tipping point between relations between the U.S. and Turkey? Because they're already soured. We already know that the two countries are at odds in the Syria policy, with the U.S. lending its support to the YPG. Turkey is very much against this. There's also the failure to act from the U.S. side in terms of the extradition of Fethullah Gülen. So could this be a tipping point?
It is going to be the tipping point, and it is going to be the actually breaking point, and U.S.-Turkish relations are not going to be in any way defined friendly anymore. Maybe there will be some skeleton alliance, sort of military treaty agreement or something, NATO, but Turks never ever going to reconsider America as a friendly country.
Salvatore, could this be the beginning of the end?
The end is already began, I believe. But Turkey is in a position geographically and also historically in a very, very specific place. So it gives us the opportunity to manage these balances of power accordingly. And it is going to be a kind of a period, as we have previously witnessed in between the two world wars. There is not one specific hegemonic power who is actually managing and stabilizing the crises and everything. But there are many more than one powers or more than one regional powers, and it gives us the opportunity with a, of course, very strategic and very finely structured strategies to manage those relations finally. But I don't think that over the last 70 years we have witnessed a certain U.S.-Turkish relationship. It is not going to be like that anymore.
All right, Salvatore, Hakkı Öcal, thank you very much for joining us here on Strait Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Turkey intervened last year in the Qatar Gulf crisis, one of the biggest diplomatic rifts in a decade. Qatar was cornered by several fellow GCC member states over accusations of supporting terrorism. Turkey stood by its side and even offered to mediate. The impact of that move seems to have lingered, with Arab nations now criticizing Turkey about a recent deal struck with Sudan. Sudan handed over Suakin Island, located in the Red Sea, to Turkey to build a naval dock and boost tourism. But Sudan's neighbors see it as a threat to their security. Ömer Kablan has more.
This Sudanese island has been handed over to Turkey for 99 years. Turkey will rebuild the area as a tourist site and a transit point for Muslim pilgrims crossing into Mecca. The deal comes after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited the island.
Batı'nın karakterinde bu var. Oraları yer ile yeksan etmek suretiyle hamdolsun şimdi yeniden restore etmek, ayağa kalkmak, kaldırmak bizlere nasip olduğu için ayrı bir memnuniyet, mutluluk içerisindeyiz.
US sanctions on Sudan were recently lifted. Sudan's foreign minister also said the deal may lead to military cooperation, causing concern among some Arab countries. To understand why, I met historian Professor Vehbi Baysal.
There is this big conspiracy theory that Turkey is trying to re-establish Ottoman Empire in the region again, and these are the singular attempts to eventually create that. So that may be a little utopic, but a lot of people in the Middle East believe on that.
Certain sections of the Arab media have raised concerns that the deal poses a threat, which the Sudanese embassy in Riyadh has denied. Erdogan's visit to Suakin Island was closely watched by Arab countries, with UAE Foreign State Minister Anwar Gargash declaring that the Arab world will not be led by Tehran and Ankara.
Now Turkey's so-called Africa opening new gates for Africa and mobilizing institutions from Turkey to go and help there is a different approach. First, Turkey, call it, actually going there to help locals. So the Arab states with such oil wealth are not doing even 10% of these things. So that's, in a way, putting them in a kind of blacklist.
Turkey now has 39 embassies and 4 consulate generals in Africa, compared to only 12 embassies in 2008. The UN's Global Humanitarian Assistance 2017 report says Turkey spent close to $6 billion on humanitarian aid and is the second largest aid donor in the world, mostly distributing aid to the Middle East and Africa. While Turkey continues to revive its historic ties with the African continent, some countries see this as a purely strategic move. But Turkey says it's about the cooperation between two sovereign countries. Ömer Kablan, Strait Talk.
Well, joining me now to discuss this is TRT World's Deputy News Editor, Halil Charles. Halil, good to have you here on Strait Talk. So, is it realistic to call this an attempt to reestablish the Ottoman Empire in the region?
I think it's still early days. I mean, what we've seen happen is that Turkey has increased the number of embassies it had in the early 2000s from 12 to about 39. So certainly the presence of Turkey, diplomatically wise, also commercial, trading, etc., has increased in Africa. And Sudan's a very important part of that. And I think what's happened for the recent visit is that the interest that's been expressed by Turkey has been met and welcomed by Sudan, who have been struggling for a number of reasons, 20 years down of economic sanctions from the US, and now they're coming back into the international community and being part of the world trading exchange. And so Turkey is a very important partner in helping it do so.
So besides having a military training base in Somalia, now this deal with the Sudanese government and ongoing talks with a possible setup of a similar training facility in Djibouti. What does this mean in terms of Turkey's military expansion in the area?
Let's be quite clear, both Sudan and Turkey have said that this is not a military naval base. They have been criticized by a number of countries, and in particular the Egyptian media, who have said that Turkey and Sudan are ganging up against it. But what we are seeing is that Sudan has reached out to Turkey to help them do a number of things. And just remember, this should also be a duty-free trading zone, as well as being a point at which that the announcers helping pilgrims go to Mecca, etc. In terms of the military side of things, they are calling it a docking port, a place where military vessels can be looked after. But there's no launching pads, there's no presence of military soldiers in that area. So we may see that later, we don't know, but certainly at the moment, both sides are keen to express and say that this is not a military base.
This has caused some disturbance. The United Arab Emirates Foreign Ministry has come out and said the Arab world will not be led by Tehran and Ankara. Why are they so disturbed with all this?
Well, the close relationship that Turkey is now developing with Sudan is also boosted by the fact that you mentioned earlier with Qatar. And there are a number of things happening in that region. There's the relationship between them and Egypt. Both Sudan and Turkey have had rather strained relationships with relations with Egypt. And also the situation that's happening in Libya, whereby both Turkey, Sudan and Qatar are backing the official-backed government there, and Egypt and Saudi Arabia are backing the Haftar group of rebels, if you like. So there's definitely a divide going on. And lastly, in terms of the relationship of the Horn of Africa in that region, you also have the dam, which is going to be on live this year from Ethiopia. This is the Grand Renaissance Dam, which threatens to affect the water supply of Egypt. And of late, Egypt have been trying to negotiate with Ethiopia to try and cut out the supply of water to the Sudan. In fact, the agreement was agreed by the British a long time ago, where 85% of Nile water should flow into Egypt. That was revised in 1959, where now that's down to about 76%. But Sudan have a 12% or roughly that kind of mark. So they're looking to see whether they can renegotiate that with Ethiopia so it wouldn't affect the amount of water that they actually receive. And then to cap that all, in terms of the military maneuvers, etc., you also have Saudi Arabia now saying that it's going to help out the enemy for much of the time. They had a civil war, Eritrea, in the region. So that whole region, we're having proxy situations where the whole region is being, if you like, people ganging up one side to another. And finally, I should mention, South Sudan is also a kind of conflict point where Egypt is supporting South Sudan's government, and Sudan have traditionally been associated with the rebels.
So there are very many complicated dynamics at play. You mentioned proxy. Are we seeing, now that Qatar and Sudan have enjoyed close relations recently, are we seeing this 6-month-old Gulf crisis sort of expand into the Nile Basin and the Horn of Africa?
we have to be very careful. Sudan, again, its official position is that it is neutral. It supports the Kuwaiti-backed option to negotiate this out of the... That seems to be dead in the waters at the moment. But Turkey have obviously stood behind Qatar. And so it seems to the Egyptians that what is happening, and it seems to the Saudi Arabians, I think, in the sense of what is happening, that Sudan is now realigning its position and taking the Turkey side and also the Qatar side. Now, within Sudan, there is definitely a clear support for the Qataris. So the Sudanese have had very close relations with the Qataris and far prefer the Qataris, who have continued to help Sudan financially, depositing money, billions of dollars into their central bank for them and helping them in terms of peace negotiations. There is the Qatar peace agreement, which was signed in Qatar between them and the rebels in Western Sudan, that Qatar have continued to support financially on all other means. And also the relationship between Qatar and Sudan have been also cultural relationship. The pyramids, there are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt, and there was a big row which happened about that, whereby Sudan said that the pyramids were older civilizations than the pyramids in Egypt, which threw the Egyptian press into a rather bit of a quagmire, and they were saying, ridiculing Sudan and ridiculing the relationship between Qatar, who put billions of pounds into supporting the industry, which Sudan hope will be very good a tourist pull and attraction. They've also ridiculed that support that Qatar has given Sudan.
The Sudanese are hoping for this investment to uplift the country, but how do you see the future of the region? All these complicated ties, does it pose a risk for the fragility of the peace in the region?
I think it does. I mean, the biggest problem that you're likely to have is this question of water. The Ethiopian dam will change the dynamics a bit, and also the situation that happens in Eritrea with the support by Saudi Arabia, the conflict in Libya, which is ongoing. So until these things settle down, there's still likely to be a lot of tension in the region. Added to that, Sudan in conflict with Egypt over the Halab and Salatin triangle, which Egypt has said is theirs. Sudan is claiming sovereignty over it, and they're going to the United Nations, but Egypt is refusing to have it heard in the international court to demarcate who the land belongs to. So there are a lot of issues that could potentially be, flaring points that could kick off and have some kind of extra conflict in that area.
Halil Charles, thank you for that. Some great insight there. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, you can feed him for a lifetime. An old wise saying, but when applied to Turkey, it's had dramatic consequences to fish stocks in its waters. Adel Halim looks at the looming crisis that could affect budding fishermen far and wide with his segment we call Straight Up.
It may not look like it, but these waters are in trouble. Dozens of fishermen line this bridge every day in hopes of reeling in the big catch. The trouble is, overfishing has crippled the industry. As you may have noticed, the fish are smaller and the price is higher.
There is less fish, maybe a quarter left of what it used to be.
It's believed there's been a 50% drop in the number of fish in Turkish waters over the past 20 years. One of the reasons is because anyone can just pick up a pole and try their luck. The Dean of Istanbul University's Faculty of Aquatic Sciences says there's plenty of blame to go around.
The fishermen are not the only ones to blame. We have been polluting our waters for the last 50 or 60 years. Both the Black Sea and the Marmara are parts of the Aegean as well. And we have destroyed fish eggs and larvae.
To replenish the fish, ecology activists call for bold action.
We have to ban fishing for at least 5 years, but for that, we have to come up with a good fishing policy.
She'd prefer a permanent ban, but admits that's a deep dive. Dr. Albay doesn't think a ban is necessary.
I don't think a 5-year ban will be good for the seas. Instead, we need to control illegal fishing, educate fishermen, keep our waters clean, and commence more research to modernize the way we manage our stocks and fishing in general.
Although some are optimistic, the significant drop in fish cannot be overlooked.
We would get 5 to 6 kilos in previous years, and now we get 1.5 kilo. And I have been here since 6 this morning.
Nowadays, even small fish have big problems. Experts say small fish like these ones should not be caught because that removes a vital food source. Instead, they'd prefer the all-you-can-fish mentality be thrown back into the water. Adil Halim, Strait Talk, Istanbul.
That's all for this edition of Strait Talk with me, Ali Can Ayandar. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us at #StraightTalk. You can also see all of our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.